So maybe we can start with a little introduction. I too would welcome being able to see you, unless you're eating lunch. If you're eating lunch, I'd be happy not to watch you eat, but otherwise would love to see everybody have it with a camera on. Tom Graniter, I public member on the American Board of Preventive Medicine, and I'm still doing some work with the American Board of Medical Specialties. And let's go around. I'll just, if you don't mind, I'll call on you in the order in which I see you. So Glenna.
Hi, I'm Glenna Tinney. I'm the public advisor for the National Board for Respiratory Care, and I am the liaison from this committee to the DEI committee for I.C.E., and I am in Northern Virginia outside of DC.
Thank you. Becky.
I'm Becky Laboon. I'm the public member of the National Board of Certification and Recertification for Nurse Anesthetists and the liaison from this committee to the Government Affairs Committee.
Thank you, Mark.
And I'm in San Francisco, where it's also very cold.
Hi, Mark Bertler. I'm the public member liaison I'm the public member on the I.C.E. Board of Directors. I serve as a commissioner on the Commission for the Certification of Health Informatics and Information Managers, and I am also the board representative to the Accreditation Services Council. I.C.E. is my life.
Cheryl.
Good afternoon. I'm Cheryl Trafficano. I'm actually a staff person, so I'm a past CEO, currently COO of the Certification Board for Diabetes Care and Education. And I actually serve as a public member, though, on a physical therapy assistant advisory board for a training program.
Great. Leanne.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leanne Mandrillo. I am currently on staff as well. I'm the executive director for the Art Therapy Credentials Board. I am joining today for several reasons. One, I'm interested in becoming a public member myself. I've served in many roles on various different boards, but never as a public member. So I'm interested to learn more about that. But I am also trying to grow the amount of public members that are currently on my board. So I would like to, become involved and learn from you all. Thank you. Oh, and I have a sharp 1:30. I'm sorry. I have a new CMS coming out on January 1, and I have an emergency protection meeting I got to go to. So I'll be leaving at 1:30.
Okay, well, we'll all talk at 1.5x speed, so that'll get us through faster. Don.
Hello, I'm Don Belesa. I'm the CEO and legal counsel of the American Association of Medical Assistants in Chicago. Still cold, but warming up a little bit today. I also serve on the Government Affairs Committee of I.C.E. and have for several years on and off. I'm finishing a term on the Advisory Services Council, and I'm not a public member. I am looking to find a public member position, preferably with a health related or allied health related board, and I'm looking forward to participating this year.
Great, thanks, Don. Kyle.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kyle Jones. I'm an Assistant Director of External and Regulatory Affairs at NBCOT, or the National Board for Certification Occupational Therapy, and I am tuning in from Arkansas.
Okay, great. Where it's not so cold. Brett.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brett Foley. I am the public member on the Nebraska Board of Engineers and Architects. And for my day job, I am a director of psychometrics and research at the National Board of Examiners in Optometry.
Thank you. Shelby.
Hi everyone, I'm a program manager at the National Association of Boards of Pharmacy. I'm not a public member. I'm just trying to get more informed and learn from you guys to potentially be one and kind of learn more about the role that public members serve. So thank you. I don't know if I'm supposed to be here, but thank you for letting me be.
We welcome you. Glad to have you here. Grady.
Hi, I'm Grady Barnhill. I'm the president of the board of directors of the International Society for the Advancement of Continuing Competence. I sit on that board along with Tom and Becky and others that you may know. I also sit on the board of the Hospice and Palliative Credentialing Center, at least for a few more days until the end of December when my term expires there. So I'll probably also be interested in a public member position or a different public member position once that is all over.
Thanks, Grady. Sam?
Going on. Here we go. Hi, this is Sam Evans. I have been a public member on the National Association of Social Workers Certification Committee, and I manage a certification program for the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And so I'm just always interested to learn more. So
Great. Welcome. Delmar.
There we go. Trying to get my place together over here. Hi, I'm Delmar Lee. I'm just sitting in to learn about public member, what you all do. Hey, Glenn and Sam, I know both of them, but just trying to find out what being involved in being a public member would be about.
Okay. I'll talk about that in a second. And then Alexander. Alexander might be having lunch. So the purpose of the Public Member Committee is to support public members on credentialing organizations and learn together about how we can be more effective to bring public voice into decision-making and governance of credentialing organizations. Does anybody want to add a correction to that? So that's what we're here for. And I feel like I have a lot to learn. I think everybody here feels we have a lot to learn. And I learn a lot from all the people I know on this group, and I'm glad to see others here that I can learn from. So I'm grateful for that. Had 3 ideas of things to talk about today. First, to recap the exchange and the pre-conference. Several of us were present for the pre-conference on the future certification, which interests us a lot. And then we had several people who had volunteered to talk about sessions that interested them. Glenna on the DEI sessions, Mark and Brett on the public member session on Wednesday, on public perspectives on the value and future of certification, Grady and Brett on testing for the people, Leanne on the future of credentialing pre-conference. I'll let you take the lead on that, Leanne, when we start talking about that first. And the pre-con on the occupational, and the occupational therapy session, which I heard raves about. So Kyle, kudos to you guys. And then I just wanted to mention a little lightning session I attended, which on leveraging longitudinal assessment for the job task analysis. So I'll just maybe put that in the parking lot. And then talk about potential topics from the coming year. We had a final meeting on Thursday morning of the conference, and a lot of ideas about things that we could had an interest in learning about. I think we're going to probably need to narrow it down because as I'm looking down at the list, it looks like we've got about 20 of them. And then we also shared some ideas about proposals for 26. We don't need to submit proposals till the second quarter of next year, but it's worth beginning to talk about it and try to give your ideas some shape. So maybe just to start off with the exchange, the pre-conference, I had my own summaries, but I'm very curious to hear. Leanne made some incisive comments during the pre-conference itself. Is she still on?
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. You're just moved to a different part of my screen. I'll give you a chance to sort of kick it off, then I'll add whatever additional thoughts I had, and then open it up to others who were there.
Okay, that sounds great. Thanks, Tom. So my first advisement with regard to the planning that I know you just talked about is that I feel that pre-conference was very good, and a lot of people may want the opportunity to attend in Rhode Island. If you guys were to do it again or do some type of video recording, it was very impactful because it talked about, to me, what I took away from it was the many different facets of credentialing in the future, right? Not just, what's going to happen with skills-based assessments or what's going to happen with this. It talked about everything. And one of the things that, there were a few items that stood out to me, but one of the things that really stood out was the role of public members in credentialing and playing a greater role in how certification and credentialing boards that are primarily comprised of leaders that are also stakeholders who carry the credentials or the certifications, how there's a lot of implicit bias in the decision making, and there's a lot of perspectives that are lost in that. And it's something that I've been working on with my board, and from what I heard, it is something that is is a need for many. Like what I've identified, many other people have identified as a need as well. And how difficult it is to find a public member and have the public member feel like they have a meaningful voice within the board. So that's what brought me to this committee, and just that the future of credentialing has to have better involvement, more public members, to ensure that the public perspective is being heard. That was a big takeaway. Another big takeaway was we really need to take a look at how we're doing assessments. There was conversations about longitudinal assessments. There were conversations about, are we assessing only hard skills? Should we also start to assess soft skills and how people could acquire that, and how those soft skills are important to a well-bodied credential and profession as well? Of course, there was conversations about AI and the role of AI in the credentialing, but also too this movement away of these high gatekeeps for individuals to qualify for credentials. You know, the time of undergraduate, graduate programs, and doing more skills-based assessment, because there is a shift that's happening within education. I mean, even while we were at the conference, we heard about how some professions, especially in the allied health arena, are within professionalization status, or could within the Department of Education. So there was a lot of various different moving parts that, to me, I felt that my personal feeling is I think that certification and credentialing is in danger right now. And I think it's a very important aspect. I myself was am a registered dietitian. So even though I don't do anything with it any longer, I think it is important that we identify what the threats to it are, and that we need to evolve and we need to change a bit in order to meet the times that we're in. So that, I don't want to take up all your time because I'm interested in what your perspectives were, Tom, as well. But what I took away from it was more is breaking down the silos of only certificates or credential holders having the leading voice in decision making. Two, the importance of understanding that there are different forms of assessment, and that people need to be not just assessed on what their education taught them, but other things that they bring to credentialing. And those are my three big takeaways.
Thank you for that. Before I weigh in, I'm curious to get the views of others who were there. I know Becky was there, Brett was there, others of you who were there and want to add some thoughts.
I will.
Go ahead, Becky.
I agree that the emphasis on public members was well received. And the keynote speaker, whose experience is primarily with licensing boards as opposed to certification, she, in response to a brilliant question from Leanne, the keynote speaker volunteered that she thought licensing boards should have a minimum of 50% public members. And that also the leadership, the executive directors of licensing boards and certifying bodies, there was no reason why they needed to be members of the profession, and a case can be made that they shouldn't be. Anyway, that I took that away, and also the sort of, you know, AI is always the elephant in the room, and in this case, it was. The message was that because AI is going to be that it's more important to be assessing what they call now durable skills as opposed to calling them soft skills, because AI is going to take care of knowledge. That was a theme throughout the day.
Yeah. I'm willing to challenge that assertion, but before we get there,
but it was a theme. I'm
no,
not sure.
absolutely. Everybody's saying it. I'm not saying they aren't saying it. People are saying it. I'm not sure everybody has to believe it. Other thoughts? Brett, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here, but I was not at that session.
Oh, you weren't. Okay,
no,
I thought you were.
Yeah.
I thought I was seeing you everywhere, Brett.
Yeah.
Mark.
No, I know.
Yeah.
I know I have a large presence that that's hard
You
to
do.
miss.
You do.
Yeah.
My memory of you spilled over into other sessions you weren't even at.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah. sort of ditto to Leanne and Becky's comments. Particularly appreciated the emphasis on public members and the value that they bring to a professional situation like credentialing or licensing. And the same thing with artificial intelligence as far as the new acronym with the HITL, with humans in the loop. And that's really key. I do a lot of work with artificial intelligence and nonprofit governing boards, and part of the challenge is to use a problem statement. In fact, I was talking with a researcher the other day here in New York, and they're using it to do some diagnostic work for Alzheimer's, to try to reduce individual bias, human bias, in delivering an assessment. So there's some very interesting things going on, and as Becky knows, a big fan of how we incorporate team culture and durable skills in our credentialing programs.
Great. Anybody else? Grady, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would just like to pile on with, I feel like one of the themes, certainly agree that I think credentialing in general, licensure certification is under attack. I think we've got a lot of resistance to expertise. People don't want to respect those old walls. To some extent, that's maybe a good thing, but we have a lot of challenges I think we face as an industry. And I think so now more than ever, I think we're going to be called on for that, all the value of certification stuff. What are we really doing? I think we're going to be called increasingly to demonstrate our own worth. Are we really protecting the public? And can we show that we're protecting the public with data? Can we provide any evidence that our processes help protect the public? So I think that's the wave of the future, I think, for me, is to use resources together, research and evidence to show that we are relevant, and to make sure we are relevant by swinging in with maybe widening our assessments to include perhaps durable skills. We just have to demonstrate that relevance all along the way. And of course, my favorite, I think we especially need to demonstrate that relevance throughout the credentialing process, most especially through recertification, revalidation, because evidence that I see so far suggests that I think we become more of a threat to the public the longer we're in the trenches. Have we stayed up to date, and what are some of the processes we can use to truly keep people up to date rather than having them just check off some CE boxes and send in the money? I think we need to demonstrate relevance there too, especially. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Grady. So I am going to sort of race through at a high level some of the things that I thought really came together at the conference. And I liked it because it confirmed all my own biases about what the future might look like. So I have to confess that up front. And I do want to save 5 minutes at the end for Leanne to have a final thought before she scoots out of the room. So yeah, well, I think I think we heard a confirmation that we are looking at a future of skill portfolios, multimodal assessments of different types of skills, possibly stacked credentials, different mindset, a longitudinal system that thinks about validation around eligibility requirements, around the job and task analysis, and around the exam, and around the impact of what we do. So all through the entire process or the entire system of certification. There was some discussion of competency-based credentials around competency-based eligibility requirements, competency-based education, competency-based assessment. And there was a little bit of discussion, probably not enough, about the need for evaluation. There was a one lonely voice there, but because it's a drum I like to beat, I thought I would just throw it on there. There wasn't a lot of discussion of it, but two issues that I think got less discussion than they deserved. That was one of them. The other one was the need for new psychometric models in this new world where we have a much more complex testing environment, and our old ways of thinking about high stakes testing may actually not be. Let's just say, because I don't want to make Brett sweat over there in his little frame. Not that they need to be discarded, but that we need to have new artillery in our testing armamentarium. And then getting back to Grady's point about validation, we need to validate everything we do. The threats are partly social and partly legal. There's always a legal threat to certification because what we do is exclusive and creates exclusive rights to practice in an area. And because of that, in our culture, it's something we need to worry about. And the worry is that we add eligibility requirements. Professor Allensworth gave a great example of it early on about an educational requirement that didn't seem to have any basis in relationship to the task analysis. And mentioning her, by the way, she was a keynote speaker for the day. I think she's going to come back to our community because in the follow-up to the conference, those of us who helped planned it had a lot of discussion about the presenters. And she was somebody that everybody really appreciated and thought we needed to hear more from, even though her focus has been on licensure and not on certification. There was a lot that was transportable to our world. So we're a future that's going to be multimodal and personalized and longitudinal and sort of systematized. That's a really different way of thinking about certification, and we'll take a really different mindset for the certifying bodies too. So if that's really what the market is expecting. I was very excited by the presentation of Naomi Boyer from the Educational Design Institute around a framework for evaluating what some misguided person referred to as soft skills. We like to refer to them as hard durable skills. But I mean, things like critical thinking and problem solving, creative thinking, but also, initiative, collaboration, self-directed learning, things like empathy and resilience. These are things actually in my world, the medical world, are really super important. And there may be a lot there that we can work with. So I'd love to hear more from her sometime in the future. So I'm going to pause there, give Leanne a chance to consume another 5 minutes before she leaves. But you don't have to consume all 5 of them, Leanne, if you don't want to, but before you take off.
Well, I hope that this is what many conversations we have in the future. And like I said, I'm sorry, in any case, a few things overall about the conference that I took away that I thought was really interesting and something I experienced, is that a lot of certification bodies really have difficult relationships with the professional association for that. And so that seemed to be theme that I heard a lot throughout, and how the role of the public member is really, really important in that as well. So that was interesting to me, and how a lot of certification bodies, if me personally, in my experience, if I think that certification or regulatory type bodies are in trouble, I really think associations are in trouble right now. And so a lot of different conversations were going on, which you guys are going to hear about later with occupational therapy, that, for the profession, for public protection, certification bodies and credentialing bodies are having to move into spaces that associations may have once held and are no longer doing. And I thought that was really interesting. And I think that is the future as well. One of the other things that I also took away, and it was a point made earlier, I think by Grady, is that we're going to really need to show that this is just not an elitist type exclusive group, that we're doing assessments, or that the continuing education is not like, yeah, I completed my continuing education, that it is matching up with the job task analysis, that people are competent, and these are all things, in my opinion, that I think we've seen coming, and we've kind of been like, yeah. And I think it's like a convergence of all of these things happening at once now. So I think being supportive of one another is going to be really, really important, because I think there's going to be a lot of change management that's going to be going on at the same time. The only thing I'll say about the future of credentialing, just as a byline, there was 2 sessions that almost felt like sales pitch, and it really kind of, to me, brought down the energy, because it was very dynamic and there was a lot of back and forth and talking, and then it was in the afternoon where you needed something really good to get you back from lunch, and it just it kind of petered from there. So that was
Yeah.
my only other feedback.
Totally agree. On this issue about the authority model under which we operated for 100 years in our world, people today do not accept that. That we get to judge them simply because we say we're the authority. So we need a different relationship with our stakeholders, and stakeholder management is a big topic, including but not exclusively the professional organizations. You have about a minute and a half did you something else you wanted to add about the occupational therapy session? That was a marketing session, wasn't it?
It was a marketing session. So in my time when I was in nutrition, I actually did social marketing. I worked on a lot of different campaigns, and it was really interesting to me to see how social marketing and how the Occupational Therapy Board brought back these tactics, for lack of a better term, to try to grow the profession. Because that's the other thing that I think we all need to be very worried about, right? Is that, if we have professions that require some level of a college education, people are not necessarily like, I'm graduating and going to college anymore. Like, that's just not the future. And so they've been really focused on how to educate the future occupational therapist about what it is that they're doing all the way down to high school to help to ensure that they are getting enough people entering the profession. And so, and just the ways that they went about being inclusive and educational and involving their stakeholders, but also involving individuals who were impacted by the work. And it was a very robust, and I can imagine a very successful campaign that I think anybody, especially in the allied health, really need to be taking a look at. Because the one thing that nobody else wants to talk about is AI, but it is true. I'm in the therapy space. That is a huge threat as well, that AI is going to come on and take on some of these other roles that people once would have sought a professional for. And so humanizing it and making people aware of it, and that it's like a best kept secret, is not something that has to be like in the 5-year plan. It needs to be something we're talking about right now. So
Great.
that's
Thanks
my
very much.
that's my spiel. Thank you. I'm really looking forward to working with you all. I'm sorry that I'm leaving. Happy
No
holidays.
worries.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Same to you. So I want to give Glenna a chance to talk about the DEI stuff, because I feel don't want to lose that. And then we'll turn to maybe Mark and Grady, and Becky can talk about the 2 sessions that were really focused on public.
So Tom, there was a comment in the chat from Sam Evans about, she says, is some of that exclusivity balanced by volunteer professional certification programs? So I just wanted to make sure, Sam, is there anything you wanted to add to that before we move on to other sessions?
No, I was just curious because there's a whole different realm when it's voluntary and it's not licensed and regulated. And so I think somebody talked about it, the exclusivity. We still see people in voluntary professions think that certifications are exclusive and gatekeeping kind of a thing, but they're voluntary and it's up to the profession and the respect for what the certifications do or don't represent. But I was just curious. I can't remember who said, going back, about.
Oh, it was I who said it, and I think it's because basically you set yourself up as a separate class from an employment perspective, and you encourage employers to rely on your credential, and that is by its very nature exclusive. And so I think the whole idea of certification is for the profession to build a wall around itself. I mean, that's the way it's viewed from an antitrust perspective, is that the profession wants to build a wall around itself for good reasons, because the whole idea of professionalism from a sociological perspective is to control your own work and not be interfered with by others, but also to create special benefits for doing that. So I think there's a lot of value in professionalism. There's a lot of value in controlling the standards for your work. And we'll have to come back and talk about that. It's too big a topic for us to talk about today. But thanks for mentioning it. Glenna, and maybe Delmar too, since you were there, if he's still on, tell us a little bit about what your experience was with the DEI stuff.
Okay. The DEI committee had put forth this session, and we titled it, I Do, Inclusivity, Diversity, and Opportunity, Transitioning to New Federal Guidelines that Facilitated Discussion on Challenges, Engagement, and Opportunities. And the title was intentionally meant to try to decrease some of the negative reaction, I think, when you use the actual DEI terms. So that was the title anyway. And it was intended to be more of an interactive session with the audience than it was to be a presenting session. But it turned out that it was just myself and Mark Franco who ended up being there. And Mark used to be the chair of the DEI committee, but he is no longer the chair or co-chair or whatever. Anyway, he's still very much involved with I.C.E. and he's an attorney. But we had structured this session to begin with putting out some ideas first, and then opening it up for interaction with the audience. It was pretty well attended. I think we had maybe 25 to 30 people. It's hard to tell. It was a big room and everybody was spread out, but pretty good representation, I think. So we did start with, we had wanted to really make people think, have people think about the fact that DEI is not new. I mean, the terminology DEI may be somewhat newer, but the movements that evolved into the DEI activities are not new. So we talked about going back to all these movements, the civil rights movements, the LGBTQ rights, women's movement, disability rights, and how those were like the beginnings of the DEI types of emphasis. And, it wasn't till much later, I guess, like maybe in the 2000s, where maybe in the 1900s, I like that, the 1900s, the DEI movement became, quote, DEI. So that was one thing. We started talking about, we did present a little bit of information about that. And then we were going to talk about, so where are we now? And, Mark gave a little bit of information. He started with talking about some of the legal issues that are occurring. And I had attended another session, Julia.
Judish.
I always try to call her English, but that's not her name. So she's every year does a session about, what's happening at the federal level, what's happening at the state level as it relates to credentialing. And so Mark talked about some of that. He talked about some of the memos that have come out, some of the executive orders, how, kind of what is binding and what is not, and who it's binding to and who it's not binding to. And then we were going to talk about some of the business case about, what are the benefits of DEI, and then what are some of the threats and opportunities, and then strategies for navigating the current environment. We didn't actually get into all of that because people wanted to talk. And so we shifted to the audience. And, people, particularly one person that came from a healthcare situation, I believe she worked in public health. So she was part of a public health organization. And she was talking about all of the limitations coming from the federal government related to even thinking about things like social determinants of health, even not being able to even put any of that kind of language. They had to take all of that language off of their websites. And so she was really expressing, how much I don't need just party line, I mean, we're trying to cope out here in the real world. And that's where the conversation then went to more about what were people doing. And, Mark and I certainly don't have answers to those. We don't know. I can't tell you, but Mark, I think he was very capable of and did a good job of helping people kind of think about what's real and what isn't real right now as it relates to DEI, and where there really are threats and where they want you to think there are threats where there really aren't threats. But there are threats for many organizations. There are lesser threats for other organizations. And so that's where the conversation kind of went. Afterwards, it was interesting because I did have people coming up to me later throughout the exchange thanking us for just having this opportunity to talk and to interact and basically to vent. Part of it was venting. Part of it is frustration. Part of it is fear. Part of it is anger. Part of it is kind of, how can we do what we're supposed to do? How can we help the people that we need to help? how can we manage all of this and still deal with all the stuff that's coming at us? So that was that session. And we did, the DEI committee has a maturity model that we're looking at for that whole DEI process, and we gave that as handout. One of them is a blank maturity model, and one of them it was filled in by that we've been filling in, the members of the committee. We also, Mark had identified kind of an action plan with about 5 steps of things you could do, and then we also gave a link to the resources that are on the DEI page for I.C.E. So that DEI committee also has regular coffee chats. I just want to put that out to everybody, like 2 or 3 times a year. And so be on the lookout for that, because those are further opportunities for people to get together and just have these kind of interactions and, just hear from other people. You just don't feel like you're isolated and alone in trying to cope with all of these kind of things, even if there are no clear answers. But there are some ways to manage, and we talked some strategies. But so anyway, that was that session, and I just also want to mention I attended other sessions too. One of them was DEI or Psychometrics 101 question mark, how the elements of DEI have existed in psychometric standards for decades. And so, buzzwords come and go, but the bottom line is that, psychometrics and allegedly psychometrics and testing is all about fairness in testing, non-discrimination policies, trying to make sure there's representation and all those kind of things. Although we all know that has not always been successful in terms of not having bias in the psychometrics and in testing. But that was another session that maybe just kind of think about, you don't have to say DEI in order to still be doing some of the work and, still manifesting or operationalizing and functioning using the values that are part of DEI. So I know that is Dawn still here? Dawn was in that session. So I don't know. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that observation of the session, Dawn?
Yes, thank you. I was very impressed with those who did share about their situations, especially that public health representative that you spoke about early on. I didn't realize that the administration was coming down so heavily on programs that were receiving federal financial assistance or under the aegis of the federal government in some way. I'm glad that she had a chance to share her situation. Others learned from that as well. I think it was a very productive session. And you and Mark did present some perspectives that were not covered by other sessions. So I would hope that those who were in attendance would go from that meeting and try to put into practice some of the things that were discussed.
Thanks, Don.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just a note, since we were closing in on 20 minutes left, we're obviously not going to get to everything I had proposed for the agenda, so I'll save the discussion of next year to next year. I'm going to work with Katie to put together a kind of a survey for you of the issues that came up at our last call, and see what your interest is in what so we can develop a plan for our learning plan for next year for our group. And then we can talk in January about ideas for sessions for 26. So I do want to give Delmar a chance to have his own views about the DEI stuff if he was there, and then spend the remaining time talking about the public member sessions and what we learned about public voice and how we can enhance public voice in I.C.E. and in certification generally. Delmar, you want to add anything?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not able to make it there. I was supposed to have been on the panel, and I would have loved to engage the people who posed the question, because it was kind of in my ballpark. Okay. I'm glad to hear that they did have the attendance and the participation that they did. But the social issue that the person mentioned, believe it or not, a lot of the concerns I heard Donald mention about the executive orders that people felt like were legally binding when many of them were not. And people who were actually doing the work the right way should not have ceased doing it, but they felt compelled because of the money threat. But I think what Mark, when I did speak with him, was going to do was really relay the fact that the executive orders had no weight, but the fear of what could be accompanied by the removal of the fund was enough to deter people from continuing on what they were doing as good work, good service-related social work. So,
Yeah. So this is definitely true. On the other hand, we're facing a cultural backlash over 30 years of social change. And it's going to be everywhere. It's not just going to be coming from the administration. And I think we're going to have to be dealing with it for a decade. So I think we really need to think hard about how we address that issue, because we've just, I just feel like there are a lot of people who want to turn the clock back. And I think maybe this is something we should be talking about on our list for next year. But thank you. I thought I heard you say that you had been at those sessions, but so I apologize for putting you on the spot. But we'll be glad to have you come and join us next year. We can talk some more about this. So there were two sessions on public input. There was one on public members, which Mark and Brett, I think you were leading, and I missed a lot of these sessions because I was double booked for a lot of the conference. And then there was the Grady and Becky had a session on, I think, Becky, you were involved in that one, on testing for the people. I really love the title.
Yes.
And so I'd like to give you guys a chance to talk about those two sessions and what, if anything, you learned that we can take away into next year's planning. So let's start with public member session with Mark.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, Maggie, Kathleen, Brett, and I sat impaneled, and we had a description of what the presentation was supposed to be, and we moved a little bit from that to make it an open forum on discussing public members generally. And we continue to learn, as Leanne said, that people aren't that aware of the role that public members play, or don't understand how public members fit into their credentialing bodies. And it's not necessarily a care and feeding of public members, but it's sort of a recognition that public members are full vested board members. And that it's not, while we're called public members, it doesn't, I hesitate on how to describe that. It doesn't confer necessarily a special status, but it confers a perspective that needs to be on credentialing bodies. And we had some discussions about how we find public members. That's a continuing discussion. How public members fit into our existing organization if we haven't had public members before. And as we mentioned earlier, the pre-session really helped, I think, set the stage for saying public members demonstrate that it's not as incestuous as it may appear from a professional perspective, and that our role is to provide that balance. And with that, I will move it over to Brett.
Thanks. And Brett, was that you, or actually you're not just a ghost in that session?
I was really there. I was up front, and
yeah,
I said all kinds of very thoughtful and moving
That's
things.
what I thought.
No, it's Mark's right. It's a kind of a very broadly conceived session. It covered if you looked at the abstract of it, it covered a lot of territory, and we struggled with how we're going to get this all in the time. And so we, as a group, said, like, this is all good stuff, but let's just double check with the audience, whether they want to hear about it, what's kind of the most important for them, so we can put the emphasis in that area. And it was really effective, I think, that decision to do that, because generally speaking, the session was conceived as, what do public members think about these particular issues? but the audience was far more interested in finding out things like Mark noted. Um, one, how to get public members, two, how to keep them, three, how to train them to be effective members, four, uh, how do we convince our board without public members to add public members uh, to that? And I think those were some of the big driving conversations we had. And folks really had a lot of interest in learning about that. And so, where that wasn't against what we were planning to do in the session, it definitely took us in a different path than we might have gone otherwise. And so we felt like we had a lot of, and I will always worry sometimes with our public member sessions about attendance because it's public members are a relatively small portion of the I.C.E. community, but it was really well attended, and I was really happy to see that. And so there's just piggyback on what Mark said, there seems to be a lot of interest in how to engage public members that were there, and so we took some opportunities to share with the group about our experiences and for those of us who weren't public members, how they work with the public members on their teams. But yeah, well attended and a thoughtful audience. They had questions for us the whole time and kept us busy and seemed engaged and interested in the topic. And so I'd encourage us to do something similar down the road in terms of maybe even just more directly addressing those issues.
Yeah, so my observation, I hope none of you executives is going to be offended by what I'm about to say, but certifying bodies, my observation about certifying bodies, people in certification bodies tend to be very focused on their own operations and very hard for them to have more sort of theoretical conversations about stuff. So it was not a surprise to me that the practical stuff rises to the surface because it always rises to the surface. How do we find them? How do we train them? What do we do with them? How do we prepare them? How do we, all that. So all that, and I think that's all real important. And one of the things Rebecca Allensworth said, which I really sunk into me, which is because I'm a sole public member on a board, is just how lonely it is. And she said, public members can't be effective when there's only one of you. And I think just even having one other person there could be incredibly, or some other just having one other person there would make a big difference. I also feel like, getting back to the point I was trying to make before, certifying bodies have a lot of stakeholders, and defining what the public is helpful. That is to say, it's not just one voice, but there are a lot of voices that need to be heard inside certifying bodies, the professional organizations being one set of voices that are really important. And by tradition, we've kept our arm's length from the professional organizations, but anybody on a certifying board has a constituency of people who are interested in a profession and they care about the future of that profession. And that's why they get together to set standards for it. And the professional organizations share that passion for the profession. And so they're important stakeholders. So anyway, I think there's a lot to talk about in this area. I happen to have been in the session. I thought it was a really good session. I was very impressed by how many people were there. I want to save some time for Grady and Becky to talk about testing for the people. And then we'll probably close out with that. And Katie and I'll do some follow-up so we can plan a very rich session for January. Grady, you want to start?
Sure, I'll lead off and just a few comments and invite Becky and Brett the ghost to join in because I know he was there also. But I thought it was a good session. We had a debate format which helped keep it a little bit more lively than just a talking heads format, I think. We had some good point and counterpoint, really unanswerable questions. It was interesting to me. We asked questions such as, should we be focusing more on competencies and soft skills, or should we, focus on core knowledge? And what about core versus specialty? Should you test folks on what they're doing versus this broad base of knowledge that the credential probably represents? All those sort of impossible to answer questions. It was interesting to me that Becky, after each debate, we would have a back and forth and then a time to rebut. Becky would check in with the audience and see which way they thought the arguments went, who won, if you will. And it was interesting to me, the audience seemed to pretty much reflect what I would describe as sort of a conservative bent. They were didn't have much courage to lose sight of the shore, shall we say. If it was multiple choice versus measuring a bunch of competencies, there would, it would be multiple choice. And later on, we asked about team-based competencies versus the individual, and that came out solidly in favor of the individual. And so it was just interesting. I thought it was a lively discussion, and be interested to hear more from the audience perspective that what Brett thought of the whole cavalcade.
Yeah, I would like to hear from Becky actually before we hear from Brett, if that's okay.
Well, let me just put it into context. I think this is the fourth or maybe even fifth year that this session has been accepted by the conference committee, the planning committee. The premise being that it originated from the public member committee. The idea being that clients and patients and customers of credentialers want to know how people perform as much as what they have learned in school. So we wanted to approach new ideas and advancements in assessing actual performance. So each year we've talked about what's being experimented with and what are the possibilities, and as Tom mentioned earlier, is it appropriate and necessary maybe to relax some of the traditions of psychometrics in order to get at assessing durable skills and actual performance. So that was the setting for the debate. And I was struck also, as Grady said, that the audience was quite conservative, and they really preferred to rest on their established methods of approaching assessment. But there were some who, when I asked for a show of hands, raised their hands for both.
Yeah.
Alternative, which again is promising, because that means that they're open to the ideas of new, more flexible, should I say, approaches to assessment. But I'm very gratified that this session has been accepted repeatedly. I hope I'm not jinxing it by saying that.
No, we'll have to think of another way to. Yeah, well, we'll put the same session out with different words, maybe to figure out a way to hide its origins.
It's had a different title every time, but it's
yeah, exactly. Brett, any thoughts you wanted to add before I editorialize on this?
No, I'll editorialize a little bit here. I was just in the audience and just wanted to share my bit of it. It's I think, Becky, your point about people voting for two things actually highlighted the peril of relying on subjective judgment. They couldn't even follow the rules for rating. How are we going to get them to do it during tests? And it's interesting, Grady, you attribute the voting based on the courage of the audience rather than the strengths of the arguments. But I'm just joking. The arguments were all excellent, and say I just wanted to chime in to say that I love this session format. And say when you put smart people up there, it was a brilliant, really well respected panel, and have them talk about issues where it's sort of a settled thing. It's the area we're comfortable with versus the area we're not, and you put them in a position where you're assigning them our arguments, and they work to win it. And so that, I think, is really a different cognitive exercise, and you really learn a lot about why we do things the way we do, and why might we make a change to that. So I love the debate format. I love assigning people a position to say, like, make the case for doing it this way. And I think that really adds a lot to our discussions, rather than, there's a lot of great sessions when everybody gets up and says folks stuff that everybody agrees with. to passionately argue an unpopular opinion, as I think really helps us move forward and keeps us aware of the challenges. And so I would just commend the panel on their expertise and the good job they did with that. Even for people arguing things that they didn't necessarily agree with, they were able to put together really strong discussions. And so I would definitely encourage, if not these topics, this format for all kinds of things.
Yeah, it was fun to
Tom, can
watch.
I add one other thing?
Sure, of course.
The tail end of the session, there was one question, which was, what do you really think of each of the panelists? Because as Brett said, sometimes they were arguing against something they didn't believe. They were just building a case. And so that tied the whole thing together. It was just perfect.
Great. Grady, were you going to say something too?
I was just saying it was really fun to watch Tim Muckle struggle with his assigned position of
Yes.
representing team competencies as something we should measure. Just great. He did a great job. But
He did.
Yeah. Well, let me just say on the team issue, our boards have not strayed from their conviction that we are certifying people, but they do believe there's a way to incorporate the team skills in that assessment. And on the issue of the psychometrics, I don't think the argument should be about psychometric certainty. The argument should be about how boards make defensible judgments. And they rely on psychometric certainty in order to feel confident that they can make a defensible judgment, but it's the defensible judgment about who's in and who's out. That's what they need to figure out how to defend. That's my view. So yes, we need to have a broad conversation about how psychometrics helps us do that. It reminds me of conversations. Every time I've had a conversation with a lawyer, they tell me what the law is about. We had a guy, our chief lawyer, and then they're going to be very conservative about what the law will allow or won't allow. We had a chief legal counsel at ABMS for the first 10 years that I was there, who had been trained in business as a business lawyer. And he said, what is it you want to achieve? Let's look and see how the law can either help you or thwart you. Very different way of thinking about it. So not a fence, but a facilitator. Okay, we are in our last minute. I got from Becky a lot of notes of stuff that we talked about in our Thursday session that we could talk about next year. I'm going to try to organize it in a way to help us to kind of sort through it and decide what we want to prioritize. I'd love in our January session to have some time to talk through. I'll do this, try to do the survey before our next call. And then we can kind of create a plan. Also wanted to, at some point, do an inventory. I think this is something Becky recommended a couple times in previous calls, do an inventory of what we currently have on the site to support people, maybe get some data from I.C.E. staff about what's being used and what isn't being used, and have a conversation about what we can work on to supplement the resources for public members. The issue of recruitment is a huge issue, and I think we've got the potential. We've got all those NCCA accredited people that have at least one public member. We got to get them all on our committee, or in our conversation in our community. So how we can build our community feels like a priority too. So anybody with a last word or want to push back on anything I just said? You have 5 seconds to push back. Okay. Okay, well, listen, thanks so much for being here. I hope all our new faces show up again. I know you won't abandon us for next time. And you'll be hearing from Katie and me sometime in the next 4 weeks. I hope everybody has a great holiday. Be nice to your kids and grandkids.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Happy holidays. Bye-bye.